Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for coming. My name is Christy Calbos, and I am an attorney. I've been practicing special education law since 2003. I started my career representing school districts, and about 11, 12 years ago decided that I wanted to be helping families. So I resigned from a law firm that represented school districts and opened up my own law firm, and now I help families navigate the system. I have a lot of intrinsic information and knowledge about what happens inside school districts from all those years that I spent helping districts comply with the law. And so it's my mission today to empower you to create a wonderful 504 or IEP for your child, your grandchild, your guardian, or any children that you may advocate for. Do we have anyone in the audience that's an advocate or an attorney? Great. And of course, all of us fall into those roles when we have children in our care who we're attending meetings for. So one thing I want to tell you is that as a lawyer, I talk a lot, I write a lot. This is going to be a packed presentation. Don't worry about taking pictures of the slides. If you email me, you can take a picture of this one, but if you email me, I'm going to send you a copy of the slides because it's just a lot of information that you're going to want to refer back to again and again. So if you just send me an email after the presentation or sometime this weekend and say, hey, Christy, saw you speak at Southside. Will you send me a copy of your slides? I'll send them to you. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We have about an hour, and I've asked Andreen to let me know when I have 10 minutes left because I'm going to take questions at that point. You can also, if you have a situation that you want some help with, but you don't want to talk about it in a group, or there's a lot of details and facts, you're welcome to go to my website, calboslaw.com. I do offer complimentary consultations. I space them out in an online calendar. So you can click the link, find a time that works for you, put your details in there. It's completely confidential. And we can have a private phone conference about what's happening and see if I can help you during that brief call, or if you need an advocate, I'll refer you. Or if you need an attorney, we can talk about what it would be like to work with me. So I always give a disclaimer. Nothing in my presentation is actually individualized. So if you feel like you need medical or legal advice, please obviously see a lawyer or a doctor. Okay, this is what I mean by a lot of information on a slide. So just absorb what you can, but know that you can get a copy of them after. So I am rooted to this podium. This is not my norm. I usually walk around, but I have a microphone that I have to speak clearly into. So I apologize that I'm not able to kind of walk and stroll, and I'm going to be looking at my slides from this angle. Normally I'm standing looking up. So this is a little bit of a different presentation for me. But why is mental health and learning such a big deal now? We are looking at an escalation in symptoms of especially anxiety and depression, that are skyrocketing. The CDC has recently said that 44% of high school students are reporting sadness or hopelessness. It is extremely important that we address mental health because when you don't have all of your cognitive functions online with you, it impacts concentration, motivation. We all know what it feels like to be depressed and anxious. And imagine sitting for 8 hours and trying to learn something, right? Or when we go to work, it impacts us. So learning pathways shut down and students can become consumed with negative thoughts. We assess the severity of it. There are certain types of mental health issues that require special ed. Here's an example of some of them. Not all of these may rise to the level of needing an IEP. Some of them we might just need a 504, and other children may have any of these diagnoses and not need either a 504 or an IEP. But it's important to be on the lookout for this because many parents call me and say, well, my child doesn't have a learning disability or doesn't have autism. And the school is telling me that because my child had some trauma or has ADHD or is a little impulsive, that we don't qualify for a 504 plan or an IEP. And that's actually not the case all the time. Severe disorders can really impact a child's ability to learn. They struggle to function. They may be absent a lot. These students tend to fall on the lower end of the bell curve, and so we're always on the lookout for signs that a child is struggling, even if they have A's. I cannot overemphasize the importance of this. Grades alone do not knock you out of the running for a 504 plan or an IEP. I have students that have come to me with IQs of 130, 140. I even have one client who has a 153 IQ. We're talking about extremely bright children, and he suffers from crippling anxiety and has been told for 3 years, you're not entitled to even an assessment of whether or not you would qualify for a 504 or an IEP, and he's really suffered. So when do we look at this? We look at it when there's an impact. Now remember, it's not just about academic performance. We may actually decide, there's a gray area in there. There's not hard and fast rules. We may decide that we want to wait 6 months and see if a certain set of interventions works. The important thing, though, is that we accurately assess each individual child's needs. If you're in a meeting or you ever hear anyone say, well, we don't serve that disability, or our children at this school don't get a 504 for anxiety, remember that we have to, this last bullet point, assess each individual student's needs and abilities. Okay? So we're going to support you if you are struggling with severe impairments, and we're going to also support you any of the children who are struggling but may not have a significant impairment. You don't have to be off the charts with an impairment to get help. And so many times educators are only looking for the standout, the child that is sleeping or crying all day, or the child that has 32 absences. You can be a silent sufferer, and you can show up to school every day and be internalizing. You can even be masking a lot of struggle. And like we said, making straight A's, appearing normal, right? We hear that word a lot. Baffled educators who say, I never would have known anything was wrong. It's true. We can become masters at hiding what's really going on. Now, if any of you in the room are in a situation where you don't currently have a 504 plan or an IEP, this slide is for you. If you feel like, okay, my child needs help and I'm satisfied that the school has done a thorough assessment and they've come to a conclusion and we don't legitimately qualify for a 504 and IEP, then here are some things, some supports on this slide that can help, right? So we can give a safe space. We can give counseling. We can give a mediator who can intervene if the child is not communicating with teachers, parents, other support staff. What we're really looking for here is a low level of support, right, that helps children put things into perspective, reduce all that mind chatter, right, and give them some tools and coping strategies. This is the lowest level, okay? This means that we're not documenting anything. No one is actually responsible for following up. The IEP versus the 504 plan is an important distinction, assuming that you're moving forward and you are looking at what are the differences. An IEP, you must have a disability that actually requires special ed to make progress. You have to be found eligible, and it can contain accommodations, but an IEP is focused on goals, which are skills that are taught by someone or worked on by someone. The difference between an IEP and a 504 is that the IEP focuses on teaching skills and providing services to heighten the student's ability to internalize self-regulation, coping, skill sets. 504 plans do not teach anything. They are disability accommodation plans. We all know disability accommodations exist in ramps for wheelchairs, wide doors. Maybe if you are in a workplace and you have a sleep disorder, a late start time. Maybe you don't have to be at work at 8 a.m. and your employer has said, okay, you can be at work at 10. When we have a disability accommodation plan at work or at school, what are we doing? We're leveling the playing field so that you just have equal access. We're not teaching you anything, right? And we are simply making sure that in the general ed classrooms, our student has equal access along with everyone else. Huge distinction if you think a student requires help hands-on or monitoring. A 504 plan would not provide that level of support, okay? And I'm going to give you lots of examples of 504 accommodations for children with mental health conditions. But let's start out with an IEP and talk about what they are and a lot of things that parents aren't always aware of. They're flexible, we can change them. They're built on what your child needs to learn. The goals have to be written and measured and monitored. You at an IEP meeting have a different role. At an IEP meeting, you are invited. You get copies of documents. You actually have an active role in creating the goals, and you have a say in the services, okay? And you also can enforce an IEP with progress related to goals. So let's say we write a bunch of goals for a year and your child either doesn't get the services or doesn't make progress. You can enforce that. The school district could have liability if the services aren't delivered or your child doesn't make progress. It's a legal document, so those legal rights may be in jeopardy. IEP services and supports are never determined by what happens to be available in the building, in the district, in the budget. If an IEP team says, we think this child needs this service, they have to write it in that legal contract, that IEP, and then they have to deliver. They cannot say, well, we think this child needs counseling 3 times a week. Let's write it in the IEP and then turn around and say, but our counselor's on maternity leave and will not be back in the building for 5 months. Or we just lost our counselor, she moved to another school, or we don't have a counselor. We don't have those services here. The district, once it writes it in the IEP, has to provide it. So they either have to go out and recruit someone else to come on board to fulfill the service, or they have to contract with a private provider. This is key. If you take nothing else away from the talk today, remember that districts contract with private providers all the time. Show of hands, who knew that districts pay private SLPs, private counselors, private OTs? Just a few of you. Yes, they do. But most of the time, parents don't realize, well, I have to actually push hard to get the district to fulfill this item on the IEP. And it might mean that I have to say, you're going to have to contract this out with a private provider, because we're not allowed to, by law, just sit and wait with an IEP that doesn't have someone to give the service. We don't wait 6 months for an SLP, speech language pathologist, to be hired. Okay, I hear stories all the time of, well, we haven't had occupational therapy in a year. We don't have a school counselor. We don't do that here. And the problem is, yes, you do have to do it if you're a school district, but where do you find the people? And so many times very well-meaning educators will tell you, we're working hard at recruiting. We're offering $1,000 bonus. We've got ads everywhere. We're trying, and they may be, but what really has to happen is perhaps we have to double the rate and go to a private agency, okay? So IEPs differ from 504 plans in that, right, we talked before about 504s are just accommodations. We're not trying to fill services, put personnel in place, but the accommodations have to be specific and detailed. We don't just say preferential seating. We need to say preferential seating in right? A 3-foot proximity to an educator, 5 feet away from a window, back to a window if that's distracting, right? 10 feet away from a door if you have a child that wants to run out a door, right? Preferential seating with obstacles between the child and the door. Be real specific in your accommodations in your 504 and IEPs. Okay, again, when they are not implemented, legal rights are jeopardized. Office of Civil Rights enforces 504 plans. So today we're going to talk about 6 steps to secure mental health supports. And if you came in a little bit late, I want to assure you that these slides seem overwhelming with the amount of information for a 1-hour talk. It's actually something that you can get a copy of if you email me, and I'll circle back around to my email address at the end of the presentation. Email me and I'll send you a copy of the slides. Here are the things we're going to talk about today. As you can see, I left off 4, 5, and 6, and I just have bullet points there, but we can count. So what we're going to do is talk about how do we establish the need for your child to get support? What are the present levels, right? In a 504 plan, we create accommodations. In an IEP, we create goals. Then we design the instruction. We talk about related services. Then we do progress monitoring. All of this, if you've not been in the world of 504s and IEPs, sounds like I'm talking another language, speaking another language. But rest assured that it will become like a second language to you the deeper you go into it. One thing that I included in these slides that I think is very important is I want to expose you to all the things that a school psychologist does. A lot of people think a school psychologist just does testing. And I have to be frank and say in Georgia, that is primarily what school psychologists are doing. And that's because Georgia has one of the largest shortages of school psychologists in the nation. There are approximately, the national average is 2,000 students to one school psychologist. Some states have lower. Alabama has over 13,000 students for one school psychologist. Our numbers are a little bit lower, but what does that mean? If you think about it, if school psychologists have a mandatory testing requirement for new kiddos coming into IEPs, all of their time is really going to be spent on trying to get these kids tested like an assembly line. However, when freed up to do other really important things with teams and school systems and kids, a school psychologist can make a huge difference in obtaining mental health services for your child, okay? So these are just some of the examples. They're highly skilled, they're a ready resource, but they're overwhelmed with work, particularly post-pandemic, okay? Here are some of the things they can do. They improve academic achievement. Here are some of the ideas. They monitor, they collect data, they reduce inappropriate referrals, right? They can really be helpful if your child is struggling academically. They can sometimes hone in on specifics. They also obviously promote positive behavior and mental health. This is really kind of what we're used to thinking about a school psychologist or a school counselor doing, right? Kind of working around the mental health, the positive behavior, and the support. But again, they also can do this. They support diverse learners, right? They can assess, we know they do that. They can adjust facilities and routines. They can monitor effectively. If you can find a good school psychologist and become an ally with that person in your child's school, that person can open doors and really assist, right? In ways that sometimes other educators aren't even aware that, those services or supports are available. They also often take a huge role in a positive school climate. Many children are suffering from mental health challenges because of a climate in our generation or their generation that is a constantly outward focused look at the world. There's an obsession with how do I appear on a screen? How many people like me? How many people commented on this aspect of me? I have to curate and carefully shape and mold my image and put it out for others. I can't be imperfect. And then the speed at which children share unfavorable, unflattering information about each other can be overwhelming for a child, any child, but a diverse learner, right? A child with a mental health challenge can take something to heart in a way that can bottom them out very quickly. And so we are really looking at how do we identify at-risk students and school vulnerabilities. And as we know, some of the tragedies of school shootings, we're really taking a very close look as communities across the nation at how do we help children who are struggling, who are taking a taunt or some bullying to heart. Okay. And finally, school psychologists can really help with partnerships and improving accountability and assessments. The first thing we need to do is review all the records. Then we're going to do some interviews. Ask them to interview you. And I apologize. I've had a tickle in my throat, so I may start coughing and have to take drinks of water, and I apologize. If they are not interviewing you, that is going to be quite important. The interviews of you to see what's going on outside of the school are going to inform them about things that your child might be hiding at school. Has anyone ever been interviewed by a school psychologist? A couple of you. Observations are key. Ask the team to conduct observations of your child, but keep in mind that a lot of times your child is just going to maybe pull the hoodie up, right? Even if told, put that hoodie down, put their head down, they're going to mask, right? So that's not the end-all be-all of a review of information. Observations should be recorded, okay? So we want to not necessarily video record them, but don't allow someone to go in and observe your child and not necessarily take great notes about the time of day, how long they observed, what setting. First period might be real different from fourth period or fifth period or sixth period. A Tuesday could be wildly different from a Monday. We have to give context to how children show up in school and in class and in different types of settings. Here are some questions that you need to be asking when you're going through this process. And you can ask this whether you already have a 504 and an IEP or you're going through the process. Do the records show any signs of this? What does progress monitoring data show? Can someone interview me? Have we done any screenings or evaluations? Present levels. Where's my child functioning right now? Academic, behavior, functional areas. The IEP has to contain a statement about the exact impact. It's not enough to say, well, we're struggling a little bit. What's the specifics? Getting to class late, 33 detentions for truancy or tardiness. Hasn't turned in 18 assignments, cries, has panic attacks, is constantly in the nurse's clinic, fights with peers, ignores peers, socially isolates, hasn't been seen associating or socializing with peers in months, keeps to themselves in the hallway, right? Those sorts of things. We have to talk about the impact. And remember, education is not just grades. It's socialization. It's communication, it's all of those things. It's important to know the baseline performance. Where are we starting so that we know what supports and services we need to give a child to get them to the end of an annual goal? Here are some sample statements of strengths that would go into your child's 504 or IEP. Good relationship with the teacher, can communicate when she needs a break. Here are some examples of things we would be very specific about. See how specific this is? Anxiety impacts her interactions with peers and doesn't initiate any contact, right? Completely passive, perhaps. Rocks in their desk and cries, an average of 75% of the instructional time per day. Becomes dysregulated, very angry, verbally hostile, erratic behavior. Defiant aggressiveness. Might miss 65%. See how detailed that is? That is an impact statement. How wildly different is that than is struggling, has a couple C's, doesn't participate in class, tends to keep to themselves. Why do I want to know about 75% of the instructional day? Because I want to write a goal that that child will gradually reduce the 75%, right, and get lower and lower and lower in that percentage. And I want to give that child options for rocking in the desk and crying when agitated, but I have to measure the effectiveness of what I'm offering. So if for that student, I say, well, you have access to a counselor when needed, but the child's never going to go to the counselor, I need to write a very specific goal that says, student will meet with the counselor 3 times a week for 20 minutes to learn self-coping strategies, self-soothing strategies, deep breathing, and reduce the current impact of 75%, right, of missed instructional time to 15%, right? That's an example of specific services and a specific goal so that we know where we are now and where we're heading. Here are some questions that you can ask in a meeting. What are my child's strengths? What are areas of growth? What's the most difficult? Then let's move into social skills. What about behavioral concerns? What are the emotional strengths and needs? It can blow your mind to hear other people talk about your child who spend 30, 40 hours a week with your child in a different environment. They may have a totally different take on your child's strengths and weaknesses with academics, social skills, behavior, and emotion, right? You can learn so much by asking each teacher in a meeting, tell me what you see, tell me what you know, right? Do you have any concerns? You might find out that your child is really angry at school and you're thinking, well, that's interesting. Or you may find out that your child is calm, cool as a cucumber, and unleashes it at home only, right? So it's very important to ask questions. And again, asking questions helps you develop annual goals. So if I have 5 areas of need, I rock in my desk, I'm agitated, I'm crying, I'm having panic attacks, I'm depressed, I'm not turning in work, right? I'm not socializing. I've decided I've given up and I'm not going to do any work, study for any tests. I have school phobia. I'm not going to even come to school, right? I have refusal. I fixate on something that happened in a particular class or with a particular student, right? Or I've just completely lost all motivation to get out of bed. We have to write a specific description of where we are now. Student is not, appearing at school, 80% of the time. Write it very specifically and then write your criteria for measuring it. We're looking for numbers and percentages. This is how we measure goals, okay? You can set them in all those areas, academic, social, and emotional. Here are some examples. I wanted to give you some examples of goals. Let's say you have a child who's not completing assignments. What is the baseline data right now? Well, we know right now only turning in 20% of assignments over 2 weeks. Okay, this is our goal. In 36 weeks, or by the end of the annual IEP, the student will complete at least 80%. We're measuring. Now, who teaches your child how to turn in those assignments? The school team, the counselor, the educators, the school psychologist, come up with what we call specially designed instruction, strategies, tools, rubrics, reminders, planners, check in, check out. They are going to meet with your child routinely, teach the skill, follow up, teach, follow up, teach, follow up, till we inch from only turning it in 20% all the way up to I'm turning it in 80% of the time. If during that journey from 20 to 80, your IEP progress reports or your teacher reports are that it's not going well, go back to an IEP meeting and say, what we're doing is not working. We need to tweak this formula. You may have to go multiple times to 504 or IEP meetings to dial it in, to get the right formula. Do not wait months before we all recognize that we're running in the ditch. We're not going to meet our goal at this rate, okay? Here's another type of goal. Interactions with peers. Ask what type of peer interaction is desired and when, where, with who. Here's an example. Initiate a verbal conversation of at least 5 words with one peer during exploratory, right? Across 4 of the 5 school days. Okay, so that would be for a child who's very socially isolated. We might know or not know immediately what the present baseline is. Teachers can take baseline data by simply observing for a week or two. I only saw one interaction in 3 weeks, and that was a 2-word interaction. What's up? Okay, so when we see that kind of data, we know this is what we need to be focusing on. Other examples. Let's say you have a child with anxiety. What is the manifestation? You know, some children, their anxiety comes out as hostility, right? Some, it's tears. You have to talk with the team and ask all those questions and take private evaluations in and take your own observations in and say, how my child shows anxiety is bloody nails bitten down to the quick, pencils that are snapped in half, papers torn up and crumpled, obsession with the phone. Whatever that anxiety is, you need to talk about it. This particular child has panic attacks, right? So what we're going to do is reduce from 5 a day down to 1 a day. Those skills, the independent use of relaxation strategies, are taught by a school psychologist or a counselor, okay? And then they're implemented and they're monitored and measured, right? This is how we have accountability with goals. Here's another example of how you would write a goal in an IEP around anger. What does the anger look like? Remember asking the questions and being specific. Is it that they shut down and seethe and sulk? Is it that they break things, throw things, punch, right? Is it a passive aggressive anger? I'm just not going to do any of this work, right? So, are they just frustrated and shutting down in class? This student, basically is shutting down, is frustrated, will get a 5-minute break, only does it right now like once a week, and we really need to do it more, so we're going to increase that, right, from 1 to 7 times. Another student is just verbally blasting everybody with aggression. This last goal here says, let's go from 15 outbursts down to 1, right, and let's maintain that over 2 weeks. Let's get that embedded over, right, the length of a school year, over 36 weeks. Here are some important tips. We just want to make sure that when you are seeking emotional support services, that it's not a one and done. Not a counselor saying, well, I'll meet with your child May 1st and then not have anything regular lined up. It really should be adequate. We should structure it. And the goal should address anxiety if it's the root cause of the problem. In other words, just meeting once, right, or just having access. I have so many high schoolers with IEPs that say, well, the counselor's there, access to trusted adult, access to safe adult, access to counselor upon request. But the child may not have the motivation, the inclination, the courage, the skill, or even really the awareness of how important it is to go and get help. They might get hijacked in the moment by the panic attack or the increasing anxiety or frustration, and it might not occur to them, hey, I need to go and tap my teacher on the shoulder and say, I need to go see the counselor. For some kids, it has to be written in there. These are appointments on the calendar. 2 times a week, 3 times a week, really important. Here are some questions that you should ask if you're in an IEP meeting. Also, if you're in a 504 meeting, but you think your child needs an IEP, you would start the eligibility process. Then you would go into an IEP if your child is eligible. Do we need behavioral, social skills, communication, self-monitoring goals? Be sure you cover all angles. Not just, is my child just having a verbal outburst? Where there's smoke, there's fire, and sometimes it can look like just an angry kid, but we might also have an organizational issue, like getting our papers together, turning in assignments. We might have some depression, right? We might have an inability to really understand how to have a positive conversation with another peer, right? So we really want to look at all of that. Here are some examples. I want to make sure that's big enough for you to see. So on my slide, it's tiny, but if you are looking at what exactly are they going to be doing, look at that second column. That is called specially designed instruction, right? That's the goal. And then the related service is who is going to deliver it. So remember, we just talked about our goal with turning in assignments. Let's go from 20% to 80% over the course of a year. Here's an example of what will happen. The special ed teacher is going to teach that student organizational skills with what? A planner, time management, meeting with the student once a week to provide executive functioning skills. Excuse me. Positive peer interaction. Excuse me. Student will initiate, excuse me, guys. Ooh, I'm getting over a cold. Great. If we are initiating positive peer interaction, we need to have practice. So this is very important. How do we do that? Not in isolation. Meet for 20 minutes to teach these skills. Panic attacks. Here's an example of what might be done. Panic triggers well-being. The school psychologist, again, would meet with your student. Anger. A special ed teacher will teach self-breaking strategies and meet weekly for 30 minutes. Excuse me. Accommodations alone might not be enough. This is really important to know. We talked about access. Might not be enough. Might need to add skills being taught. Here's some questions that you can ask in an IEP meeting. Do you think my child needs these things? And have you considered any assistive technology support? Progress monitoring, very important. What we're looking for here is someone to record your child's responses to what is being done. The teacher, the counselor, the psychologist. If we don't measure it, we may not know. Here's some examples. I'm going to run through these slides quickly and then answer any questions if I can get through them without coughing. Excuse me. These are things that can be done for your child that supplement a 504 or an IEP. And remember that accommodations just level the playing field. They can be in IEPs, but it's not designed to give your child an advantage or teach a skill. They change the presentation, a response, a setting, timing, and scheduling. May or may not be enough for your child. It depends on what your child needs. Here's some tips. Make sure that those accommodations are applied across all settings. Specify timelines. If you're asking for extra time to turn in work, be very specific about that. Always include homework. That can be a bugaboo. Here are some services that your child might need. Speech language, physical therapy, occupational therapy, all the counseling services. Don't leave anything off the table when you're looking at these things. You might need parent counseling and training on your child's disability. You might need tutoring to get caught up from a spell of depression or anxiety. You might need a school nurse to check in with your child if your child's having anxiety and panic attacks, right? These are just a couple of slides at the very end that are teaching you things that I teach my clients, what to bring to a meeting, just so that you are calm and prepared. Get your records organized, record the meeting, try to stop your recorder every 45, 50 minutes for a break in your recording. Bring some pictures or videos of your child if you think those are important or helpful. For 504 meetings, ask to be invited. Parents are not required to be invited. Thank you. I think she's bringing me some Mints. Thank you so much, Sandra. Ask for them to send a copy of the 504 plan to everyone on the team to make sure everyone sees it. 504 plans are not often followed. Okay? It's a collaborative process in an IEP meeting. A 504 meeting, they don't have to invite you. They don't have to look at your records. You're not necessarily considered a part of the 504 team. They can make decisions with or without you, but an IEP meeting is a different ball game. It's a professional business meeting. You're creating a contract. Ask a lot of questions and just breathe, take breaks, don't rush. If they're rushing you, just say we might need to find a second time to meet. These are important decisions you're making that could have a lot of impact for a long time. What else can you ask for? You can ask for meaningful daily parent communication. And by meaningful, I mean like, do you really want to know, did your child participate, raise hands, eat everything, right? Drink water. Like, what are the hallmarks that tell you whether or not your child is on track that a teacher might miss? Is it meaningful for you that your child actually sat with others at lunch, right? Or didn't sleep through math and science? Create a communication sheet that's meaningful that you can share with the teachers. You can co-create that in a creative way. And always document all of your concerns inside the IEP and review the IEP before it's finalized. Want to make sure everything that you have said in the meeting is captured accurately. Your parent concerns are going to be read by people for the next 12 months inside that document. Now, I am going to counsel you or coach you to always keep a written record of conversations, verbal conversations you have with folks. Confirm things in writing and keep a paper trail. Our memories fail us. We don't remember that we talked to so-and-so 3 weeks ago about depression and anxiety, and now I'm getting an email that my child's going to fail and have to be retained. You want to keep a paper trail of all the verbal conversations. You put the teacher on notice 3 weeks ago, we're going through something, we're going to need extra time. But now it's 3 weeks later and you don't have any evidence, any paper trail of that conversation, and we're stuck. Follow up on those phone calls. Keep a journal or a calendar. You have to be the reminder. You have to be the one to follow up. They're very, very busy. Document your child's needs. Make sure that the team has all of the information. You sort of have to be the leader of the paper getting to everybody. You have to email all the teachers. So getting yourself organized will reduce your anxiety, and you won't be as angry when balls get dropped, which are inevitable, right, in any type of industry. But with teachers these days, they're slammed, and they need parents to help them stay on top of things. So you may have to be the one emailing. I recommend that you go digital. Don't write on the original copies of things. This is also that if you ever have to present it, you're up to date. You've got everything clean and neat and organized. It really reduces your stress level when you can put your hands on the IEP and turn to page 13 and it says, the teacher will always give you a study guide in advance. Or that on page 22, your child is required to have 3 counseling sessions a week for 20 minutes. And you're just now finding out that your child's not been going for 6 months. Right? To be able to find that information to advocate for your child is really important. It does take a lot of time to prepare for meetings. A lot of times we just roll in and anticipate that a lot of times we assess others as being more organized than we are, right? We think we're the ones that are the least organized, but there's a learning curve here for you, so it might take you a little bit longer to get all of your paperwork together, read through the IEPs line by line, ask for lots of help, work with experts, and really be sure to take care of yourself. You are arguably the hub, right? You're the engine, and if you're not being taken care of, a lot of things start to break down around the sides. So again, if you need a copy of the slides, feel free to email me. You can go to my website for a consultation, and I'd be happy, tell me, Sandrine, we have 6 minutes? 10 minutes?
We have about 10 minutes.
About 10 minutes. I'd be happy to take questions if you have any. If you have questions that you feel like are too private or personal, you're welcome to book a consultation with me, a complimentary consultation. But does anyone have any questions? Yes.
You
find that public schools specifically, public or private schools, will shy someone away from an IEP versus a 504 for financial reasons?
Yeah, so I'm going to repeat the question just because our microphone doesn't pick everybody up. The question is, do I find that public or private schools shy parents away from an IEP towards a 504 for financial reasons? Sometimes it's financial, but a lot of times what was happening 30 or 40 years ago was everyone was being classified as special education. And the pendulum in law tends to swing like this. So then there was legislation around what we call RTI, Response to Intervention Progress Monitoring, to try to slow down that pipeline because there were so many kids being dumped into special ed that they had to slow it down. And that was having a financial impact. These days, the financial impact is there definitely for IEP students. 504 students often don't get identified as kids who need an IEP. So teams aren't necessarily sitting down and thinking, how can we save money and not refer 150 children this year? But they are thinking in terms of money, but they are thinking we don't have enough teachers, classrooms. So there's a financial impact, not necessarily in dollar bills, but in availability of resources. So teams don't think this will save us $50,000, but they do think we don't have another teacher. We can't put another child in that classroom. We're already maxed out at 15. Where am I going to get a parapro? Or, this child probably could do with a 504. So there is thought about money, but not actual dollar bills as much as resources. Private schools in general don't have to follow the same laws that apply to public schools with IEPs. Now, they have to accommodate children. Yes.
Hi, my son is going to middle school, but he has a one-to-one, he has a categorical. And I have run into the issue before, like when his categorical left, they were telling me that I had to, that they were still looking for someone to employ. If you, I know that you can get outside evaluations for different things, but how does that work when a child is supposed to have a categorical and they, can't find anyone?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So her child has been assigned through the IEP process a one-on-one parapro. One human being hired, assigned for just her child. That's like winning the lottery, right? When you get that, you hold on to it very tightly and you don't tell other people. And so what happens when the parapro quits or resigns or decides not to work in that school, and the school says, well, we're trying to hire to replace, but we don't have anyone. So there is a severe shortage of paraprofessionals, bus drivers, counselors, psychologists, and special ed teachers, and even just general ed teachers. We're actually in a national crisis, a historic crisis. 50, 100 years from now, they're going to look back at this time and say, that is when education in America really began to hit the skids, because the profession is hurting for personnel, deeply hurting. And so what happens is we have parents filing complaints with the State Department of Education. So the Georgia Department of Education, if you go to that website, you can fill out a formal complaint that says my child's IEP is not being implemented. We're missing whatever the services are, right? And you will end up going to mediation, or an investigator will take over the case. If you can get to mediation, you can sometimes convince the district in a private mediation to hire an outside agency to provide your child with one-on-one support. What does that look like? It usually comes from an ABA clinic, Applied Behavior Analysis Clinic. It usually looks like a behavior technician, a registered behavior technician that comes in for $40 or $50 an hour compared to a parapro hourly rate of $10 or $11 an hour. So you can imagine, if we're thinking about dollar bills, districts don't want to fill parapro positions with this more expensive alternative. But you can't sit and wait. That one-on-one is super important for your child's success, and it's no different than a speech therapist, an occupational therapist. You almost have to take it to a point of filing a complaint or requesting a hearing before a judge to force the person with the checkbook from the district to come to a meeting with you and acknowledge that there is a lack of services and liability, and force them to find a solution. And if there's not one within the district's ranks, the human resources machine is churning, they're advertising, they're trying to recruit, then they have to go private with the service. They have to hire privately to fill it. They will not tell you that. They will tell you all day long, like I'm standing here talking, we're doing the best we can. We cannot do that. We don't even have money to pay our teachers. We can't go pay someone else. And that's when you say, you know, I went to this webinar, this seminar, and the lawyer said you can't use money as an excuse, right? Question?
Yes, I'm an ABA provider, and I wanted to ask you, what do you think that Georgia is at as far as this kind of situation with hiring the private, service provider, especially when they have insurance coverage, and having the provider go into the school provide services? Because I work in LA, and that was, or in California, and that was something that we have available. But I know that California is a little bit more.
Way more progressive. Yeah. Yeah.
So where do you see us at in that, continuum?
So Georgia was one of the last states. The question is, where do we have ABA services? Applied behavior analysis is a methodology. I'm going to botch this. You're the professional here, but it's a methodology, and some people call it a philosophy of how to use science to address behavior change. We mostly see it with children with autism and maybe severe behavioral disorders, okay? Georgia was one of the last states in the nation to get on board with declaring that a medically necessary therapy that's covered by your insurance. What happened then was a lot of parents quickly went to their doctors and signed up, and then they were given anywhere from 5 hours a week to 40 hours a week of individual therapy from a behavior analyst, a board certified behavior analyst, and a team of people called registered behavior technicians. They're behavior analysts, behavior experts, and you can imagine the gains that we're making. It's considered the gold standard of therapies for children with severe behaviors. What then happened was parents were like, oh, I've got all these hours, I can't use them. My child's in school most of the day. Let me ask the school if I can send my behavior tech into the school building during the day to help. That would make sense, right? Not to schools. In Georgia, if the team says the child needs that level of support, guess who has to pay for it? The school. They do not allow parents to send their private nannies, speech therapists, any RBTs, anybody private is not allowed to typically go into the building. Occasionally, principals might slip up and make an exception. I've seen some IEP teams make exceptions, rare, but it really becomes problematic for schools because if you let one, then you're going to let two, and then you're going to have 20 kiddos with their registered behavior technicians sitting next to them in class, second guessing the teacher. They're afraid of that. They're afraid of someone from the outside coming in. Yeah, so Georgia is not progressive about that. Thank you guys very much. Really appreciate it. Let me know if you need the slides.